episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Queen. And of course, we're going to be talking about Brian May. And Queen is literally, rock royalty. And I know they're from London, England. They formed in 1970. But even if they were from Detroit, they would still be considered rock royalty, or at least in my opinion. But luckily, they're not from Detroit. They're from England, and they're phenomenal. Legends of rock music. And Freddie Mercury, the late great, frontman and vocalist, is still held in high regard and respected, and people love Freddie. Brian May, a pioneer of rock guitar, very clever use of effects and different sounds and tones, usually blasting out of a Vox AC30. But then the layered harmonies and some of the interesting use of delay to create some of those harmonies live is really inspiring. But the whole band, John Deacon, Roger Taylor. I mean, if you're a musician, whether you're a vocalist, guitarist, bassist, or a drummer, you can learn a lot from studying the music of Queen. And they have so many different, avenues and textures and directions in their music. They have rock and stuff, which is mainly what we're going to focus on in this lesson. But they also have, ballads and operatic, moments and a lot of piano-driven music. So they're kind of all over the place, acoustic stuff and electric stuff. And definitely a very exciting band, still, massively popular and respected. And this is going to be a pretty fun lesson. So here we go. There's a lot that's been written and discussed about Brian May, and a lot of attention and this kind of glowing limelight that surrounded him, since the 70s. And aside from the fact that he's a world-renowned, rock guitarist from Queen, and he does have a PhD in astrophysics, which I can't really think of very many other guitarists that I admire or have noticed that have a PhD in anything. But he, obviously very intelligent, very gifted. Has a big brain, in his skull. But he's applied that to music and then also to sciences and things like that. He's obviously very influenced by the universe and astronomy and things like that. So it's interesting to really kind of notice, where he is and who he is and what he's done and accomplished in his life. And he's influenced everybody. I mean, you could name almost any guitarist on your favorite guitarist list, and they either respect Brian May, they were directly influenced by him, or maybe they've even, worked and recorded with him. And that includes people like Eddie Van Halen, Nuno Bettencourt, Steve Vai. I've heard Andy Timmons. There's a whole bunch of, famous guitarists that just love Brian May. Nuno Bettencourt loves Queen. He's a huge Queen fan. You can definitely hear that in Extreme's music. But also Eddie Van Halen. You can tell, if you go back and listen to some of the early Queen, and then you kind of compare that to early Van Halen, you can hear some of that influence. And, he actually worked with Eddie Van Halen, like on a side project. So here's an image just sharing some of the people that Brian May has either recorded or worked or performed with over the years. And there's a lot more, but this is just kind of a small sample. And with the opening, that was Tie Your Mother Down from Day of the Races, and it's such a famous song and a cool guitar part. And it's based around very basic chords. It has that kind of boogie kind of riff in the beginning based around an A power chord. And then you have these giant hard-hitting partial chords and slash chords that he's channeling. So once again, something like this. Kind of borrowed that last part where he's sustaining those chords. That actually happens a little later in the song, but I just kind of put that in with the mix just to kind of give you a little bit, more of what's going on there. But with that first part, it's really just an A power chord, and he's also playing around with the C note right there. And it's all about the right hand, the way it's being picked, because it's one chord and a single, C on the A string to the open A string. But it's the way he's kind of treating the chord with the pick hand that is, kind of noteworthy or interesting, because he's really kind of, picking and separating the notes of that chord ever so slightly. And it's unusual, but it has that really driving sound. And then it's just a G power chord, kind of, Pete Townsend or Malcolm Young inspired. Which, of course, Brian May inspired Malcolm Young, but Malcolm Young, made a career of playing that chord with AC/DC. But definitely Pete Townsend's really where that came from, at least for rock guitar. And then a big stacked, D power chord, and then a C sus2 to a G over B. Something like that. And then later in the song, when it really hits that part, that other part I kind of added there, because I'm kind of taking that out of sequence from the song, but that's the G power chord, and then a D over F sharp, and then the C sus2 and the G over B. Next we have Stone Cold Crazy, which is from Sheer Heart Attack, and of course Metallica famously did a good cover of this song, but I always find myself drifting back to the original, Queen's version. And it's mainly, single notes, and then there's a B flat 5, power chord kind of in the mix. But it's just rocking, and it's pretty early too. You got to think this is like the early to mid 70s. And, it just saturated and influenced everybody because Brian May is just a powerhouse guitarist. His tone and the chords, that he plays these huge, epic sounding chords, but it's usually just simple, open position shapes or some power chord shapes. But it's the attitude and that kind of energy that he puts into his playing. It just makes it sound alive, where it's like, wow, something like this. And there you can see we're really just going between, F and G on the low E string. And then grab that B flat 5 power chord and really hit it. Don't be afraid to strike the strings. And the second time, there you can see we're going between that F and G, and then also B flat and C. And after that B flat and C, he just climbs up chromatically, B, C, C sharp to D. And then you start it over. Next up, we've got the song It's Late, which is from the News of the World album. And this has this kind of slinky groove and very cool guitar part for sure. Something like this. See, we're doing the single note line, between that low E open F sharp on the second fret there, and then the open A, something like that. And then it's just an A major to a D over A. You could also play that as an A power chord at first, but then you're kind of also playing that D over A, so you probably just want to go ahead and play A major. Kind of playing between those two chords. And right there after the D over A, he just kind of comes down this little single note line. And then the second time through it, he alters that ever so slightly. So there on the way down the first time, he goes from F sharp to E, and then on the way down the second time, he goes from E to F sharp. He just flips it. Something like this. kind of a lesser known Queen song, but I always like that riff. It has that cool kind of groove, and definitely an influential song too. I'm sure a lot of people, heard that, and they kind of borrowed, from his ideas for sure. All right, here's another lesser known Queen song, and this is Sweet Lady, and it's something like this. And there you can see we're actually playing, sus4 chords, and the rhythm, it has this kind of herky-jerky rhythm to it. And the song, once it gets going, that's actually before the song really takes off, and I don't even think the drums have really even come in at that point. And you hear it again later, like in the middle of the song, it comes back. But it's interesting, this is 1975 when this was recorded, and he's playing all these sus4 chords. There's an E, and an E sus4, a D, and a D sus4, and an A, and an A sus4. Now, Brian May obviously didn't create or invent, sus4 chords. Those have been used, since, classical music used them, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And definitely members of Queen have, tapped into classical music traditions and habits and, compositional techniques. So that's probably where some of that came from. But then I'm pretty sure, both of us, you and I, whoever's watching this and myself, know there's a certain guitarist that's really famous and well known for using those chords. And of course, I'm talking about Eddie Van Halen. So I think Eddie, even though he usually just mentioned, Clapton and a little bit of Jimmy Page, and, he kind of mentioned some of his influences in interviews, I think Brian May was actually a bigger influence than he ever, kind of fully admitted. And there's an example of it right there. So that's 1975. You have to think Eddie really didn't display, those sus4 chords until Dance the Night Away, Van Halen 2. And then of course, Unchained and Panama, and there's a lot of other examples too. But that's kind of an early peak of, rock guitar using sus4 chords. And I just love that first line right there. It's really cool, hard hitting. And the second time, and I also like that part too, that little fill. Really cool. And then the last time before the drums kick in, he just kind of hits, 2 E power chords there. But, obviously this is my own theory, and it's not really a conspiracy theory, but it's my own theory that I think Eddie Van Halen was influenced by some of those moves and ideas that Brian recorded, early in Queen's career. The next example is the very famous, extremely famous Rockin' part from We Will Rock You. And the main reason why I included this in this lesson, because it's a very popular song, it's been transcribed and broken down, for years and years and years and analyzed. But I've noticed a lot of incorrect, transcriptions online, and people, performing this part of the song kind of incorrectly. And I think some of it is just the tone. He definitely has a very distinct, kind of noisy, fuzzy, sound. It almost sounds like a wah is kicked on, like it's a tone filter. But I don't know if that's actually what he's using, or it could be some of the, interesting pickup selections he has on his Red Special. The guitar that he and his father built, at home, like when he was like 16. And that's such a cool story. It's like, okay, you guys took wood from an old fireplace and you literally used, pieces from bicycles and motorcycles or whatever, and just made this Frankenstrat or a Frankenstein, guitar at home, which is so cool. And so I'm not really sure how he's getting the sound, but I can definitely show you, the parts. So it's something like this. Something like that. And it's interesting because he's playing chords, and then when he moves up, in the higher position there, he's actually blurring chords and lead together. And I was mentioning the sound that he has, like kind of nasally, almost kind of a wah pedal, as a tone filter kind of effect. But I think the sound that he's using and that very distinct tone, it kind of masks, the notes and what he's actually playing. And so it's understandable why people, listening to it or trying to understand the guitar part, they might get a little confused and their ear might hear things that's not actually there. It's just that fuzzy, nasally tone. But the whole song is just building to this part, which this is the rock you part of We Will Rock You. And it's just that, hard C power chord that's hit really hard, and then an A, and he's kind of, using like open strings and kind of making some scratch, noises before he moves an octave higher. So the big secret there, I guess, before we move to the top part, is this. And there he's really just kind of making some noise on the bottom. And he's kind of implying, like A and then a G back to A. And then move up an octave higher, and you've got this. And that's literally, an A or an A, major chord, and then a D over A. But it's an octave higher than where we were earlier, when we saw that. And then this little part. And then right there, you're going to play D over A. And then right here, it's kind of like F sharp minor pentatonic, like a blues lick. And then go back to that D and D over A action. Great guitar part, very, very famous and influential too. But it's just a great part to work on because you're mixing chords and these lead licks together, which is unusual but so inspiring, where it's like, okay, I wonder how I could kind of tap into that and mix chords and rhythm with the lead, which is so cool. The last example is One Vision from A Kind of Magic, and I know the first time I ever heard this song, I think it might have been on the radio or something, and it just floored me. I thought, what is that? And I turned it up, and I was younger, I was a teenager, but I remember hearing that guitar riff, and I thought, wow, I want to learn this song. That's rocking, and it really is something like this. Something like that. And it's using what I've always nicknamed 38 special chords, even though Queen obviously was before 38 special. But 38 special notoriously had a lot of songs that use those. And they're power chords mixed with, basically slash chords, or partial chords. So in the beginning there, it's just a D, and then it's an A over C sharp. And I've seen some kind of odd transcriptions of this floating around online too, where it's like, no, that's not what he's doing. It's very simple, it's just really, 2-note chords. But once again, his tone is making it sound massive. So he's not playing, big bar chords. It's little chords with a big tone, like that. And then right there, it's going to move down and you've got basically a G over B to a C power chord. Now when you hear the song start, he actually plays it just like that. And then after that, he starts changing the rhythm just ever so slightly. So it has this kind of randomized rhythm into it. And he does lock in and plays kind of the same thing for a while, but then he eventually reverts back to kind of changing, the way he's strumming or the rhythm that he's using. So the second time through it, it's more like this. He's just kind of changing how many times he's hitting those chords. But I really do like those chords, and they're very popular. They've been used, obviously by Queen, and I mentioned 38 Special. But there's a bunch of songs, that have those type of chords in it. it just kind of hits, you know, in a different way. And once again, a big plus there is his tone. It just sounds massive. And there's a lot you can learn, you know, from kind of noticing not only the physical things that he played, but also the tone and effects and the way he kind of shaped his sound over all those years, you know, playing with Queen. That's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Queen. And definitely, you know, when I chose to create this lesson, I did have some requests actually from viewers out there, you know, that asked for Queen or asked for some Brian May. And, you know, very interesting guitarist, a lot you can learn, you know, rhythm-wise and lead-wise. He has some, you know, wicked licks and ideas, you know, up his sleeve for sure. But, you know, I was trying to think of something positive, uplifting, you know, inspiring, you know, just some feel-good music, you know, for this episode. And literally my brain just went right to Queen. I mean, and I've loved Queen since I was a kid. And I remember hearing, you know, like Another One Bites the Dust. I think it was like a public pool, and I was swimming. And I was probably, I mean, I was young. I mean, I was swimming in a public pool. So I wasn't even, you know, playing guitar at that time. And I remember I was in the pool and the radio was blasting, you know, a radio station. And I remember hearing Another One Bites the Dust, and I was dancing in the pool. And my friends were kind of teasing me, like, what's wrong with you? And I was like, it's the song. I was like, listen to it, you know, and I was all into it. And I remember that. And then eventually, you know, I heard more of their music. And by the time I heard Bicycle Race and some of that stuff, I thought, I love this band. You know, Bohemian Rhapsody, of course. And there's so much. I mean, they're legendary. They're respected. People love Queen, you know, and so do I. I'm definitely a big fan. Leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.